Hello. Hi. Uh, Minnesota is a Dakota and Ojibwe homeland. It's centered within Dakota creation stories and is also an important place in traditional Ojibwe history and the history of other Native nations. It is both an ancestral and contemporary home to many Native people. The idea of home and homelands plays a central role in our recently developed Our Home Native Minnesota exhibit. I'd like to welcome you to the first in a series of Artist in the Gallery programs. Originally, we planned to hold these programs in the Our Home exhibit space, but today I'm joining you from one of our collection's storage rooms in the lower level of the Minnesota History Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. I would also like to take this time to acknowledge that museums in many ways have played a role in cultural interruption for Native people, and it's our responsibility to acknowledge and work towards repairing that. My name is Ben Gessner, and I'm the curator of the Native American collections. Today we'll be visiting with Sarah Agaton House, a former artist in residence, about her work as a moccasin maker and a beadwork artist, and the connection between her work and cultural revitalization. Our format will be informal. Sarah and I are going to chat for a while, look at some pieces from the collection, and then check in with all of you. Please leave questions in the chat. Staff are moderating that space and we'll bring them up during the Q&A. We're very glad that you're here today, and we welcome you to join us each month as we listen to and learn from Native artists, teachers, and makers. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for introduction.
Well, bonjour. Now, kwe gijigo kwe indigo. Sarah Agaton House and Indigenous Cause Jaganashimo. Magazine in Dudame. Pashka Metigo in Dunjaba. Gaba Iganing in da. Heartbury in Dananoki. So I just said that I told you my Anishinaabe name, and I'm Eagle Clan, and I'm from Fond du Lac, but I live in the village of Sawyer, and I work for Heartbury. But I'm just like really grateful to be here doing this. So hopefully that works. This is what you have. We call Resernet. It doesn't always work.
It's great. It's really, really nice to be here with you today. You know, we haven't seen each other in person for a long time. Okay, so do you want to? I want to know how you would explain the type of art that you make and what you practice. It maybe in a way to explain it to someone who maybe has never heard of it before, never heard of beadwork or Ojibwe floral.
Oh, okay. Well, Ojibwe florals really come from, I think, on an intuitive level, that your art reflects whatever you're around. So where we live in northern Minnesota is obviously super dense with plants coming across each other and touching each other. And so really on a real, like a basic level, I think comes from that. And we used to do obviously quill work and painting and other kinds of art, and beadwork is a trade developed, evolved art, which now I think that most people, Native people, really associate beadwork with the kind of art that we do. And Ojibwe florals are specifically like all different kinds of plants are connected on the vines, and the kind of work that I do has a lot to do with not only making but teaching. So I really try to focus a lot of my attention on helping other people become makers and really develop their skills as artists, because I used to do a lot of making art for people, and I just saw that what people really needed was the skills to be able to do it themselves. And so I do a lot of moccasin classes, and moccasins and Ojibwe moccasins are called like pucker toe or split toe moccasins. And that's what we did a lot of with the residency. And I'm sure we'll show some more of those, but that's a big part of what I do is teaching classes. And in a normal time frame, I would be teaching a lot of classes. And obviously right now that's very weird and strange and isn't happening as much, but cultural revitalization is a big part of my work because I really want to build those skills in our community. And I was really given them really freely by my teachers. And so I feel really a big responsibility to pass that on.
That's lovely. Let's talk a little bit more about your residency. I think this is a good transition into that. Do you want to talk about sort of how you learned about the program maybe, and what your proposal was, if it changed a little bit while we were doing it, kind of, take us through it if you'd like to.
Well, I remember when we had that first conversation about the residency, you and I don't think I would have applied for it. I think that I thought that residencies and things that like Minnesota Historical Society were for people who were super accomplished or somehow on some other level. And so it really was the encouragement of the staff there and you in particular who were like, you should apply for this, that I would have even tried it. I just never would have really actually thought that it was something that I could do. And I had a lot of ideas, like these are these things that I know we need. And making a moccasin book was something I'd thought about doing for a really long time. And every time I'm in a class, we need patterns. And I have these stacks of random patterns that we've developed over time. And it was something I'd always talked about doing, but I just didn't ever have the time to do it. So really kind of was like, okay, I'll just try to apply for this, and I believe I even sent you some ideas, like, here's all these master plan ideas I have. What do you think? And really loved the idea of working with an apprentice for a lot of reasons, but that was really great. And so Michelle Defoe worked with me on this project, and she really did a lot of the sewing and a lot of hard work, a lot of frustrating hard work. And this was just something that I wanted to have in existence. And I really believe that that's really what we need to do, is just see what we think needs to exist and make that thing a reality. And what I think the residency did, as self-serving as this is it made it possible for us to make that a reality, for this tool to now exist that didn't exist as broadly before. Because I would be meeting people with patterns in parking lots all like probably 2-3 times a week. People would be like, can I get a size 6? And I'd meet them. And so I was like, this is really something that just really needs to exist. And also there's sort of 2 styles of moccasins that we're kind of known for. And one is a round toe, and that more looks like where it's rounded like this. And then the other one is a split toe, which has this split down the center. And this was a style that had really haunted me and I was not good at, and I really wanted to get good at it. So as you see in this stack, I had lots of practice to get better at this. And that's a lot of what we spent time looking at the Historical Society, was these amazing split toes, is what these are called. Split toes or pointed toes, people call them.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to grab a pair here. You asked if I'd pull a few pairs of the historic moccasins, and I'll do that. But also, wanted to move into talking about the book that you produced, this moccasin pattern book. I was wondering if you would talk about it's bilingual, and I know that was an important part for you in sharing with your community and your family about the moccasins. You're also talking. There's some other cultural lessons kind of encoded in there, and it seems like language was a big part of that.
Yeah, so I worked with Maji Gwineash, Gordon Jourdain is his English name, and he was my daughter's teacher actually at the time at immersion school. And I'm not a first language Ojibwe speaker. My grandma was the last person that spoke Ojibwe in our family. And it was really important to me to have these instructions and these learnings be in the language that they originally were in. And that I think that sometimes while I was doing this, part of what was interesting that happened was I started to find myself wanting to dumb down the directions. And I would say things to Maji, who was translating for us. So things like, well, I could say this simpler. I could say, move it over 1 finger width or whatever, instead of saying move it over 1/4 inch. And he's like, is there anything that you can say, we can say in Ojibwe? So it's really interesting for me to realize how we underestimate our own language, that anything that we want to describe, we can do it in our own language. And it was really cool to see the way that he would even translate things like YouTube or, like things like that into our language. It was really cool. And there's so much in our language that's so much more descriptive. That was really beautiful to learn a lot of what things mean behind what they mean, or behind what like the surface translation is. And so that was really a super cool and amazing experience to be a part of that. And also as a tool for language learners to be able to go through this process in our language. So hopefully that becomes something that I'll be better and better at over time.
That's great. I'm going to hold up a historic pair, probably from the late 1800s, of the split toe design. This is a pair that you came in and studied, and I've got a couple questions about this for you. And some of them are kind of superficial, and some of them are a little bit heavier. So I just wanted to first of all talk about the process when you'd come in and look at the historic pieces. What would you do? Would you draw them out? How did you translate that into the patterns that are in your book?
Well, so like I'm like one of those people who just has to figure stuff out all the time. So we would bring in like cotton and pieces of paper, and with like how you have the gloves on, like wrap the paper like around the moccasin and like cut it and try to figure out how it would fit. But I think what was so amazing about looking at those pieces was looking at the just unbelievable mastery, for one thing, of like how amazing they were, but also looking at and pondering sort of like why would they make these certain choices? Why would they maybe pick this color, or why is that like this, or why is that like that? So it's interesting to see that there was places where you'd say like, oh, maybe they ran out of this color or that color, and so they switched to this color, and just to see that. But yeah, we really made a lot of patterns from just taking cotton and kind of putting them together, and then we'd go back home and try sewing them together and seeing what happened. But a lot of it too was interesting, was just looking at the materials that people were using, and how I think we started to see that the kinds of materials that people were using was really going to affect how the moccasins turned out, and how old ways of tanning hides and doing things makes your moccasins look different than the way that we now have commercially tanned hides and other things that they don't look as good, they don't work out as well. And it actually was super revealing to me why I had struggled so long with making those split toes. So it was kind of revolutionary. And to see so I'm gonna like nerd out about puckers for a second, but our moccasins have puckers on them, right? And so there's all these different ways that people make puckers, and I've seen probably 6-7 ways of doing it. But looking at those moccasins, the puckers on them are so small and so perfect that it really gave us a place to strive towards. That like those folks made that happen, and so that we knew it was possible. Because sometimes until you really see something that's done that well, you know, still like, does that really exist? And so you'd see those and be like, oh, so perfect. I mean, they're just, and that pair in particular, oh my gosh, they're just like so great. They're just smooth and flat. Because a lot of people that make split toes know that a lot of times you make a split toe moccasin and they end up looking like an elf made them. So like, here's like an elf pair, and they kind of curve up at the end. This is not what we want. But as I worked and I did more pairs and more pairs and more pairs, and we met with mentors and traveled around and met with different mentors and talked to lots of different people and got all their different tips. And so you started to see how the moccasins in the collection, and then combining that with the people that we knew, and just taking all these pieces and pulling them together to be able to finally make a nice flat split toe moccasin. And if you make moccasins, this is the real accomplishment right here. I was very excited.
Well, can I ask you, just for pretend I don't know anything, which probably shouldn't be too hard for you, but You should. What you said the need is there in your community. You also said that you'd be meeting with people to share designs with them a few times a week. That you were really feeling like that people wanted these moccasins. What's the reason? What do people use moccasins for today?
Oh yeah. So partly I think that where we're at is at as a community is at a place of reconnection. A lot of people now will have traditional funerals where they'll need moccasins for those. People want moccasins for their babies. I think where we're at is at this place where people are seeking that reconnection. And so I would get all these phone calls that would be like, oh, I know this is really last minute, but I need a pair of moccasins for my dad's funeral or my uncle's funeral. And you never want to say no to those kinds of requests. But I started to see like, oh, what my community really needs is to know how to do this. They don't need me to do it. We need to have moccasin makers in every family so that people can care for their family. Really, that's what it is, right? Is an act of love when you make something like that for someone. And so whether it's a baby or somebody who's just got out of treatment or somebody who's going through ceremony or somebody who's just dancing in the summer or somebody who's passed away, like making moccasins and those kinds of acts for each other is a tool for really us to help show how to love each other. And if we can do that for each other, that's really like a vital piece of our humanity, but also our revitalization. So it's like reconnecting to that part of our humanity that I think that's where I was like, oh, that's what needs to be happening. Is I don't need to do this anymore. I need to teach people how to do it. And so I've gotten to teach like in the last 7 years, like easily 600 people, probably more than that, how to make moccasins. And so that really means that that's how many more families have that person who can, when someone dies, you have a way and a tool to grieve and care for that person and show them how you love them. Like that's what those things do. And it's so powerful and important. And so I really see that that's my role. Like I'm super, like it makes sense to me now, you know? So I don't even remember your original question, but I went on a whole
I would just add to that as a curator, I get to see what looks to me from the outside is this incredible kind of renaissance in Native communities. People are really working hard at bringing back language. They're working hard at bringing back cultural arts. They're working hard at pre-colonial diets. And all of it to me sort of centers around community health. And like you said, the act of showing love and caring for your community. And I think that is incredibly important today when sometimes things feel really unloving out there. So this is really, for me as a community outsider, this is a really special place to be and to occupy and to see that museum collections can be assets to the community. But that said, sometimes the ways that collections came into the museum is not the way that we would acquire something today. And so if you don't mind talking about it, about maybe what it's like emotionally or what it's like spiritually to kind of come into a place like this. I know prior to working with us, you had done some work with the tribal museum in your community. And I know that's much different space than coming to a big institution.
I didn't know for a long time that you could actually go see the objects that are in the collection. And I had went there one time before and I was just so in awe and so amazed to see it all. But I think that there's like a experience when you walk in those halls that it's like there's a lot in there, right? Like but I guess I feel okay and safe in there. I feel like these ancestors that made them, they love me, so I'm good. But I do think I think there's still obviously like a lot of work to be done around repatriation and I didn't go into the spaces where there is like ceremonial objects and that kind of stuff. So I wasn't involved in that part. But um, I think that being that they're there and this is the situation, um, that people know, it's important for people to know that they can go there and see them. That like these essentially it's like a public space that really everybody could access this. And so I think that's my, I think what I would want people to know is that this is your space too, for you to go in and see these beautiful things and to look at how our ancestors did this unbelievable beautiful work that most of us don't have this in our families. Like I don't have in our family this kind of work, you know, more than one generation back. And so it's really like to be able to get that close to objects that were made by people that long ago and to see, to be that close to that level of mastery and love that people put into that work is really, I think, a super powerful experience for me, because it's like a reconnection to somebody that was been gone for a long time before I was ever here. And I don't have those objects in my family to experience that. And so I think for me personally, it was really powerful. Be like, wow, that lady in that picture made this, and I'm right here getting to be this close to it. That's a really beautiful experience, I think. And so, you know, we got to make lemonade out of the lemons here.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, thank you for answering that question. I also wanted to ask you the name of your project and the name of this book is my grandmother's gift, and you know you talk about. I know when the work that we accession, that's part of the program, part of the project is that artists will make available at least one piece of work for us to purchase as a museum. And so what you made for us was a pair of moccasins and a pair of adult moccasins and baby moccasins. And I was wondering if you would mind talking a little bit about what that meant, how connected to your grandmother.
Oh, yeah. So my grandma was a complicated person. So my grandma was a boarding school survivor. So she wasn't a maker. She didn't sew. She didn't beat. She didn't do any of those things and that I ever saw. And she was the last language speaker as a child, but never spoke it as an adult. And so a lot of my experiences with my grandmother were her talking about the boarding schools as she got older and her experiences being there and wondering why her family sent her there. Why did the nuns treat her the way that they did, and all the things that she lost. And so that's what I got from my grandmother, was the stories of her loss and that experience. And I really took from that here I am in this space with the privilege to be able to reconnect to these things. And so when it was time to think about this project and the name of the book, I wanted to call it that, to Nokomiso Bagijigan, because even though my grandmother didn't give me this gift, our grandmothers collectively kept that alive, and our grandmothers collectively stayed alive. Like my grandmother survived that experience, came home, did her best to love her children, raise my dad so that he could raise me. And so even though these people come in, they're very complicated people because of their trauma, that we're still here because of them. And the gifts they gave us are still profound. And part of the gift they gave us is just our life. And so that's part of why I called it that, because I didn't have that kind of grandmother, that grandma that would like hold your hand and walk down. You know, that's not how she was at all with me. But she told me a lot of stories and made me understand why we were in the situation that we're in right now. And I think that's super powerful and has been a really driving force in my life. Her loss was a driving force in my life. And so the moccasins I made, you know, my grandmother, I never saw her have a pair of moccasins. The only moccasins I ever saw her have was the ones I made when she died. And so I wanted to make her essentially a pair of moccasins that she deserved to have. And, you know, really, if I had had the kind of relationship with her, we have had if she was a person who didn't have to live through that experience. Maybe I would have been that little girl wearing those moccasins, and she would have been that woman in those older moccasins, and we would have walked in those moccasins together. And so it was like the moccasins that neither of us ever got, really. And I feel like that's what we can do, is make those, we can repair those, even though my grandmother's passed away now, like we can repair those bonds, and we can repair those relationships, and we can take what we got from that and move forward with it. And so that's kind of how I always think of her. I think of her as like the girl at boarding school who never got those moccasins. And so I did my best to make the most old school pair I could come up with. Lots of frustrated beating to get to that point. Frustrated sewing to get to that point. But yeah, I really believe that we can learn so much from hardship. As much as I hate that. And it's right now too, you're like, man, I must be learning so much right now. But that's what I really believe that's important. She taught me that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This has been something that's incredibly personal. I feel like to you, this sort of aspect of it. I also wanted to talk a minute about how you are also what some might call like a commercial artist. You also have, you've designed blankets and cell phone cases and et cetera, and have this amazing company called Heartbury. And I'm wondering, do you like to talk about, a lot of times people like to put artists into categories. They like to say either you're a traditional artist, or you're a contemporary artist, or you're a graphic artist, or we split it up. But it to me, when I see the work that you've done, there's a lot of flow in between those categories. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of beautiful things happening on the more commercial end too. I wonder if you might talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, so Heartbury to me is really an example of how we're not just traditional. We're not just contemporary. As Anishinaabe people, as Native people, we're not stuck in any of those spaces. And so I really resist the whole notion that we have to be one or the other. I believe that we can take the tools from what's around us and move forward with all of those. And so the work that I do with graphic design supported the ability for us to create this book. It's like all these things prop each other up in a way that I think that's just who we are. We're always adapting, we're always changing, but we don't have to adapt to assimilate, right? We can adapt to revitalize too. And I think that is who we've always been. And we need to let ourselves be that. There's this whole notion, I think, within the Native world of like walking in two worlds. And I reject that notion completely. I feel like I'm walking on one path. I'm one person. And if I have to try to do two things all the time, and I think people call it like code switching or whatever, that's very, very difficult. It's very exhausting. Can be super destructive. And so I feel like the more that we can just be our genuine self all the time, be authentic, be rooted as much as we can, that's going to be better for everybody if we can just do that. And so that's, for me, part of the attempt of what I'm trying to do is be able to do all those things together. That I can have a business, I can do cultural art, and that I can also support each other. And I feel like that's really just who we always are anyway. I imagine those women the first time that they saw those big cast iron kettles, and they were like, oh my gosh, look at that kettle. They were like, oh, I don't think I want that. Like we've always done that. And we traded pre-colonial, we've always traded. And so it's about just choosing what we feel like is important. So that's kind of what I try to do.
I I was thinking about your residency brought you to a lot of places, and sort of we've presented together a couple times. We had the opportunity to travel to Banff, Canada, to present at the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies, which is an incredible experience. But in that case, you were holding workshops, moccasin workshops for people from outside your community, and I'm wondering if you've ever experienced also being a younger person and teaching, maybe elder people about something that they didn't have the opportunity to learn. Do you ever, from within your community, do you ever get some pushback about what you're doing? Is it what's it like? What's it like to be a teacher and trying to really actively revitalize something that's been lost in some ways?
I think that I really try in a class space to acknowledge that there's lots of different ways to do things. There's lots of different ways that people have been taught how to do things, and that all of those ways are right. That if you learn from your teacher, your auntie, your whatever, to do it this way, great, go for it. This is just the way, and I try to say it over and over again in the class space, even. This is just the way that I've gotten used to doing this, and this is why I do it this way. Or this is who taught me this, and this is why I do it that way. That I think that we always have to leave that space for people to have their own way of doing things. I really have been, I think, overwhelmingly been supported in doing this kind of work. Traveling all over Minnesota, Wisconsin, different reservations. And when I get asked to go do a class, usually at another reservation, I'll say, "Are you sure there's not somebody there who can teach this? Like, are you sure?" But it's really remarkable to me because how much people want to know this kind of stuff. And the other part though is people do come into these classes with all kinds of feelings about their identity, about their connection, about their loss, the grief and the anger and shame, lots of shame. And so when people are going through this process through these classes, those are all the emotions they're working through. So it's also helping people in that space work through those emotions and just kind of helping people guide people through that process of their feelings about who they are, and getting to watch them pop out the other end victorious is like the best thing. I absolutely love that part of doing classes. But overwhelmingly, I have like a lot of support. And I think that it's resoundingly like, and I'm sure there's people that don't like me or what I do, but that's okay. I think, but we went to Banff and we did the classes there, and that was really interesting because I've never taught classes where it was a totally different like tribe, totally different community. It was so fascinating because when we first got asked to go there, I said, "Well, yeah, we can teach at the museum, but I really want to go to the tribal communities by there." And at first, I could tell they kind of weren't really sure about that. It was the Stony and Dakota community is the community that's really close to there. And I was like, nah, I mean, the only reason I'm not coming if we're not going to the res, like we got to go to the res. And it was so great because we met like all these great people in the Stony and Dakota community, and they were wonderful. And they showed us the way that they make moccasins, and we showed them the way that we do. And it was awesome. I love it. But I go into those spaces expecting people to be who they are. And Ojibwe people are very much like this too. Very much like, whoa, who are you? Why are you here? Like, who do you think you are? And so I expect that, like that's just what we do with each other. And we just kind of be gentle and come in just from a genuine place, I think. And it's been pretty good. It's been great.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you have any work in front of you that you'd mind sort of sharing or walking through? Earlier you held up a pile of ones that didn't make the cut. Do you want to kind of maybe if you can kind of give us a close up of some of the work that you've been doing and what you have there?
Well, if we can nerd out on split toes for a second.
Let's. Yeah.
I started, with making all these patterns. And I would make a pattern, like for example, when we come to the, to the historical society, and I'd make a pattern, and then I'd sew these together, and like sure, like these are fine, they're okay, but the puckers are kind of a little bit bigger than I'd want, and I would try another pair, and then I would try another pair, and these are all different leathers. So you get something different every time. I tried all these different kinds of leather because there's commercially tanned hides and there's brain tanned hides. Well, so I'll tell you my victorious moment is I went to go talk to Karen Savage, who was one of my teachers, who was a Fond du Lac amazing artist. And I had been telling her, I saw these pair of moccasins on this lady's feet, and she was from Canada, and they fit her feet just perfect, and they're all smooth and flat. Like, see how flat that is? And I was telling her about it, and I was like, I know that they can be made. And I brought her this big stack of moccasins, and I was like, you see this? I can't do it. And she was in a chair, like a wheelie chair, kind of like this one. And she wheeled herself over to her side of her office and pulled out a bin, and she pulled out this moccasin, and she's like this? And I was like, oh, you have the Holy Grail in a bucket underneath your desk. And she pulled out her X-Acto knife and she started cutting it apart. She's like, here, take this apart. And she put it down. She made a pattern of it. She gave me some leather, and she's like, here, go home and practice sewing this. And that is the kind of deep gifts that I feel like the mentors and teachers that I've had have given me. Like just that, like she just cut up this perfect pair of moccasins so that I could, but then was like, now you go and try to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I ended up with these babies, which I'm super proud of and was able to make. And then I made the ones for you all. And now I know how to make this kind of moccasins that I really, really struggled with. I mean, it was months and months and months of sewing to get to where I wanted, because I knew it was possible to make them look like they did in the archives. So yeah, I just sometimes you just gotta struggle through it. You just gotta keep trying and failing over and over and over and over again eventually, and then ask people who know what the heck they're doing. There's a lot of those people out there.
We're gonna check to see if we have any questions from the audience. Megan Evans says, I recently learned about
Mazini Bagachige
or birch bark biting as an art form, and also a form of pattern making for bead and quill work. Do you use birch bark biting to make patterns in your art? Have you ever done that?
I've done a couple of birch bark biting classes, but Denise, who was also an artist in residence with the Minnesota Historical Society, is the birch bark biting. I would call her the expert in that. So I think if people are curious about that kind of work, that's who I would check out, is Denise, and maybe we can link her somewhere in here. But I've only just tried it and done it a few times. I'm not nowhere near an expert at that. But what I like to do is just really look at a combination of old patterns and just walking around outside. The more time you spend outside, you'll start to see the shapes and the patterns that are out there and the plants that are really important to you. So like these are my moccasins. That's why they look like this. They're all worn out. But the kind of plants that I put on my work is usually something that's important to me. And so I have tulips and strawberries on here because strawberries are the heartberry. So that's obviously part of why that's so much a part of everything that I do is strawberries and heartberries. But and the tulip is because during like a really hard part of my life, someone gave me a bunch of tulips and was like, go dig in the ground. This will help you. And I was like gardening and snot was running out. I was crying. But in the springtime, the plants grew, right? And so it was this like always reminder that no matter what's happening, no matter how hard things are, you just keep digging in the ground and new life is going to come again. And I feel kind of emotional actually talking about this right now because I'm like, that's how I feel right now, right? Like we are digging in the ground. So much digging. But that's why I put that there, is to remind myself of that, and then to remind other people of that, that I can always tell that story of just staying steady and just keep digging in the ground and keep gardening, right? Because things are going to change again. And then the strawberry, there's all kinds of stories and teachings about strawberries, but really for me it's like about like always coming from here, like always coming from my heart in anything I'm doing, whether that's business, work, parenting, whatever it is, like always coming back to this place. And so that's what I try to do with my work, is really combine both plants I think are important, but also like looking at pictures of old pictures. And that's old bee work, and that's what I would suggest people do. If they don't have something in their family that they can look back on. That was my long answer.
No, that was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, well, let's move on to the next question if we got it. How did the Historical Society acquire their collection of these works? Joyce Engel asks that. And that is a big question. We've got, we're a large collecting institution just in the material culture collections. We have over 250,000 objects. We've been collecting since before Minnesota was a state. If we look at the Native American collections, specifically, we've got about 6,000 objects. And between here and our partner site, Mille Lacs, we've got about 3,000 that are Anishinaabe or Ojibwe. So that's a lot to have here. A lot of what happened is there were some, around the turn of the century, in the 1910s and the teens, a lot of anthropologists were kind of engaged, and then beyond that, were engaged in salvage anthropology. And so the kind of prevailing idea was that Native people were going to go away. They're either going to be completely assimilated, or, their culture was going away. And so we better go and collect a lot of this stuff. So salvage anthropologists, they play a complicated role in that history, because there were people like Francis Densmore who collected a lot of material from Grand Portage, but also made really close connections with that community, recorded information about plants, recorded information about music that some people today are using to help revitalize. There have been, a number of other ways on how items end up here. And today we collect specifically, we collect items that are related to our region. And so in the past, where we may have taken a Navajo blanket, for example, or weaving, today we wouldn't. We have much more of a regional focus. And definitely there's a great preference in this collecting area for working directly with makers and supporting artists and community members directly. So that's kind of where we're at today.
I think that was interesting to me, was to think of like, potentially if I make something for the Minnesota Historical Society, that there will be a name and a person, right, attached to that, and the story of it will be clear. And so if somebody comes there and sees what I made, they'll know that I did that with good intention. Our relationship was one of good intention, and that piece is there with no malice. There's no malice in it. And I think that that's really powerful, is to be able to know who made something, why did they make it, and what's the story behind it. And I think that, because people have asked me like, why did you make something like that for the Historical Society? And I was like, well, part of it is because then there's something there that, like, there's a real Native person that made it. You know who it is. You know it wasn't stolen, and you know that it was done with a good intention. And I think that that is part of why I wanted to do that and why I agreed to do it. But yeah, complicated for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Next question. All right. Lauren Peck says, I jumped in a little late, so Sarah might have already addressed this, but how did she originally learn moccasin making and beadwork?
Well, my mom tried to teach me how to bead when I was a teenager. And I was like, this is so stupid. This takes forever. And I was like, throw it down, like had a temper tantrum about it. And she just kind of left it alone. And then when I was in my 20s, I wanted to dance at powwows. And so my brother was like, well, I guess you better learn how to sew and bead then. And so I did. He taught me, my mom, Karen Savage, Wendy Savage, Winnie LaPrairie, all the people that really taught me a lot. And making baby moccasins was kind of how I started making moccasins. And what's crazy now, that was like 20 years ago, which I can't even believe. That is insane to say that right now. But but I think that, so I was in my early 20s when I learned how to do this kind of stuff. I think that's important for people to know, that even if you didn't grow up making and knowing these kinds of ways of life or cultural art ways, that's, you can learn this as an adult, and it's never too late. It's never too late for you to make that connection for yourself or for your family. And, you know, I've worked with people who are elders who are making their first pair of moccasins, who are like in their 70s. And this is the first time they've ever made a pair of moccasins. And it's never too late to make that connection. And who knows, maybe someday you'll be known for making them, even though you never knew how to do it as a kid. So this is not the way that like I grew up, but this is the way that my kids grow up. And so I'm really happy that we've been able to have these be a part of our life. So yeah, lots of answers. My experience has been that if I ask people how to make stuff, they are more than willing to show me. It's very rare for someone to be like, oh no, I'm not going to teach you how to do that. And so I don't do that. I try really hard not to do that to other people either.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right. What size beads and what type of beading techniques did you see the most in the moccasin collection here at the Historical Society?
Well, her name's Emily. Emily, let me tell you, there is some fascinating things in the archive ones. Like there was like horsehair wraps on like the whelps of the moccasins. I mean, there's just like unbelievable meticulous things. And like the pair I think that are there are like size 13 or 15 beads, which are really small. And like normally I would make moccasins with like a size 11, which are a lot bigger. And so it was so cool to see just how much care and time people were putting into those items. And there's even a breadth in there of that. Like some are, you could tell people had taken forever to make them. And some they were like, all right, I got to get this done by Friday. And I've done that. We've all done that. And so it's super cool though to see them and look at like just the unbelievable mastery. And then like the hides, like a brain tanned hide, just that alone is a piece of art. To be able to brain tan a hide is, so I've never done it. And so to be able to see the different styles of hides and stuff that are in there too. And I think that's a part of making moccasins that a lot of times people don't know about and don't realize is the background. When people say like, how long did it take you to make that? It's like, well, somebody shot the deer. And then we like laugh, but it's like true. Like somebody had to shoot the deer, tan the hide and do all that stuff. And I just got to come in and like sit here and, you know, I didn't drag the deer through the woods. I'll let my husband do that. So.
All right. I know we have a few more questions. We'll do our best to get to them. And Christina Marcos says, was there a special design your mother taught you that you use today?
Interesting question. Okay. So in my family, there's this one design that my mom had recreated. And so my grandpa had done some beadwork way back in the day. But I'd never met him. He passed away long before we were born. But there was a piece of beadwork that it was in a house my grandparents' house that my mom had saw and had drawn a picture of it, like drawn the way the lines went and had drawn a picture of it. That piece of beadwork burnt up in a fire. And nobody has any other beadwork from my family. And so this piece of beadwork is like the one thing that we have this design that my mom pencil drew with one day when she was in our grandparents' house. And so, and it's crazy is my grandpa was an alcoholic and had a very hard life, lived, and died really young. And this piece of beadwork, this design that my mom traced is like this one beautiful, amazing thing that my grandpa made. And it's this way that people who are even have a really hard life sometimes have a really beautiful part of them. And so she recreated that design and I recreate that design. I've got a tattoo of it. I try to use that, but I don't use that necessarily in like my commercial designs, but just in my own family's design. And then in my family with my kids, then they have designs that I try to reuse for them. And so I think that we can recreate those things for ourselves. And just like that, my kids associate me with these certain things. Like that's how quickly we can revitalize is in one generation, we can create a completely different reality. It's like that quick. That's just how powerful our decisions are. And I think people can get hung up there. And I just want to encourage people to not get hung up there. Is to say, what am I going to create with what I got? And our kids, they're not, you know what? They're not going to know any better. Our kids think that that we know what we're talking about half the time. And so they're just going to be like, oh yeah, my mom just does all this stuff. And I'll be like, yeah, totally do all that stuff. It's great. So yeah.
Right on. Perfect. That's sweet. I never heard that story before. That's lovely. All right. Another question. Alexandra Buffalohead. Sarah, could you speak on cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation?
Excellent question. So I think it's really interesting. So as part of Heartbury, I do design on wool blankets. And obviously wool blankets is one of the areas with companies who appropriate Native designs and don't work with Native artists. People buy those. People love Native art, right? People want to buy what they think is Native art. But a lot of times people aren't actually getting Native art. They're just getting something that looks Native. What's interesting to me about the wool blankets that I design is sometimes people ask me, well, can I buy your art? But what's interesting is people don't ask themselves, can I buy a Pendleton? So if a Native artist is selling something like that, like I think like it's interesting that we don't wonder whether we can have that, but we wonder whether we can have fake Native art. So my thing is always like, did a real Native person make that? Where did it come from? Who is that person? And I don't make anything that I feel like is not appropriate for people to have. And I think that we can also, there's things that is not appropriate for everyone to have. And I just don't make those things publicly, right? Like if it's something it's not okay for everyone to have, I just wouldn't share about it. And so those are the kind of things that I think that we can really just be upfront about with people. Like, this is just not appropriate for you. And people need to respect that reality.
Let's see.
You got to go over the other way.
Over other way. All right.
Yeah, so we have a tagline in the Inspired Natives Project, which is Inspired Natives, not Native Inspired. And so making sure that where you're buying your Native art is from a Native artist and that it's benefiting a Native artist is just a real basic level to address that. Like it's just on a real basic level. And most of us had never thought about it. I had never thought about it. Did an actual Native artist make this? Or where did it come from? Who made it? And who's benefiting from it? And those are the kind of questions I think we can ask ourselves when we're using our dollars is who's benefiting. So
great. All right, we have some more questions. So they're coming in. Trisha Jones, big hello to Sarah House from the Lakota Nation. My question is, how much of your artistry is newer, and how much do you think is lost to history?
Wow, interesting question. I think that yes, and both, and a lot. So I think a lot has been lost, but I believe that a lot of it is just there waiting for us. That part of what we need to do is dig up those is to look for those stories, to seek out people to turn over those stones, to ask people to help us, to ask around to help us, however you think about that. That when I imagine our grandmothers out there, that they put out what they wanted to be saved and that it's just out there waiting for us. And so I think that I don't look at things anymore. When I was younger, I had a lot of anger, but I think that I look at things that they're just being set aside for when our kids and our grandkids go out there and ask for them. That's really what I believe.
Sweet. All right. And the last question I think that we'll get to is from Alexandra again. It says, thank you, Sarah and Ben, for this today. Really appreciate it. I'm wondering what is next for Sarah and Heartbury.
A vaccine for COVID. I am working on some really cool architecture projects. So something that's been really exciting lately is I get asked to do like these really cool projects where I think, a lot of Native artists get asked to come in after the fact, like make a poster, which is fine. But to be able to work with architecture teams like on the architectural level and really put our work and our thought into the actual building being made is very exciting to me. And so I'm really excited to be able to do some of that kind of work. And my business is continuing to grow. I employ 2 people now, so that's super exciting and great. And I love doing that. I still working with 8th generation, and so that's really cool. And I just like to always grow and learn new things. And so that's my plan, is to just keep on expanding and keep on learning how to do things that I don't know how to do. If I'm not in over my head, I'm not really living.
Mm-hmm. That sounds right. Well, I think, we're about at time, and I just want to really, really thank you for doing this. We are going to continue this series, and in October, Dr. Kate Bean, who is from here at the Historical Society, will be interviewing Randy Lynn Boucher Gallago, who is a cradleboard maker, Dakota Janae cradleboard maker. So stay tuned for that. And I did just want to remind everyone that when you're comfortable coming back out, the History Center is going to reopen October 1st, and that means that the Our Home Native Minnesota exhibit reopens that day as well. And yeah, just thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Miigwech to you for having me here.
Yeah, great.
Good to see you.